tonight we're at St. John's Martini Bar for our happy hour story time. We have Jack Dumas and Brown Dumas, longtime city residents of the city of Crystal River. Jack is our assistant city manager, and they have both been fire chiefs in the city. They have a very long storied family history, and they're here to talk to us about it tonight.
One thing about Crystal River, it never changes. It's such a boring place to be that y'all came out on a Sunday afternoon to hear us talk. So some things never change. I will say that I am still trying to figure out how Leslie roped me specifically in on this. I am known for my ability to say no, and
No.
yeah, exactly. Somehow, some way, here we are. So, a couple of things that thinking through this process. Dad and I, talked about it, and we decided that we were not going to make it structured, mainly because we knew that we would both freak out if we were to have a written dialogue that we had to maintain, and that's just not us, so we're not going to go there. So we're just going to go seat of our pants. That's the way we seem to work best. So as we move through this, do realize that what we're going to be talking about is memories, and memories are they're a little bit flawed because they're based on the perception that we had at the time that it happened. And we may tell stories today that, because I got kinfolks here, so they may remember them a little bit different than we do. So, do realize that things, when we remember them, we don't remember them fully. We also don't remember them completely. The other thing is there was a request that, or there was some, in the process of putting this down on paper, Leslie had indicated that we're going to talk about the dairy. I will tell you, we're not going to talk much about the dairy. If anybody has questions about dairy, we'll tell you what we know about it. But ultimately, the dairy, my grandfather had the dairy, and the family, he sold the dairy, and the family moved from the dairy when Dad was 10-ish. So memories from there are very specific in nature. He did, I guess, there was a process where they sold the dairy to Miss Smith, and then ended up buying the cows back and running it for a couple years after that. So there were a couple years in which he did run, work on the dairy, but as far as those were even in his early teenage years. Probably what we're going to talk about most of all are what he remembers from his late teenage years and early in his early 20s, early adulthood. So that puts it in a time period, of around 53 to 10 years after that. So we might have some memories after that too.
Yeah, right.
So anyway. In doing this, one of the things that he and I talked about and is to kind of reference, what was Crystal River like, at different eras, and probably the two things that that changed Crystal River a good bit early on was the rerouting of 19. And then the four-laning of 19. The rerouting of 19 took place in 1937. Prior to that, if you were headed north to south and you were not in any big hurry because you knew better, 19 coming into town from the south is about where it is now. Until you got to Sarah's, and I'm going to have to put this in reference for Dad, Jones Restaurant. And there was a big sweeping turn there, and 19 came down 3rd Street up to Citrus Avenue, where it turned again, coming through town right in front of this building. crossing over to Crystal Street. Crystal Street ran to the east. 19 turned to the west. Technically, it turns to that is correct. Because and then goes back through on 6th, Northwest 6th to the old back way to the mall, if you will. Went across the mall property and went across where 19 is now to old 19, and then actually came back to the current 19 up north of Red Level. That happened in 37. That was a big change. And you can see that there were a number of gas stations. That's one of the things that's really easy to see. Gas stations in town that shortly thereafter, they either moved the gas stations or those gas stations went out of business. New gas stations were opened along the new 19. 1964 is when they 4-lane 19, keeping it in the current route that it is now. So. Of course, other big things that have changed the city. The no-name storm was a big thing, but from there, let me just get Dad in this because it seems like I'm the one doing all the talking. But growing up here, you had how many siblings?
There were 6 of us, but at the dairy there was only 4. But I had a sister 3 years older than me, and then a brother 14 months younger than me, and a sister 16 months younger than her. So there's 3 of us pretty close together. And then 9 years later, she had another sister from the youngest one there. And then 6 years after that, Mama had another daughter. So she had kids for, I think, 20 years, same man and woman. So.
Do you remember much about growing up on the dairy?
I remember being a kid and learning how to milk cows.
And when you milk cows, this would have been prior to 1945.
Yeah. And we milked them by hand.
Okay.
And the milk was not pasteurized; it was just delivered raw. And then when we had the dairy the second time, they had milking machines on the cows for the cows, and then they had pasteurizers to pasteurize the milk.
And prior to 45, y'all, of course, you'd have been 10, but your dad would have delivered milk where?
Well, we milked the cows, we processed the milk, and then we delivered it to people in Crystal River. Every other day to Homosassa and Homosassa Springs, and every other day to Inglis and Yankeetown. But we deliver milk in Crystal River to the houses every day. So.
And when you processed the milk, you delivered strictly whole milk?
No, we delivered whole milk, but then if you wanted it separated, we had skim milk, and then we had whipping cream, and then we had made butter and so butter too.
Can y'all hear in the back? No. Okay. Okay.
Buttermilk.
Okay, so we're going to have to talk louder.
Okay.
What the mics they put on are not for them to hear. So we got to project a little better. Okay. So yeah, got it.
Yeah. Okay. How's that?
So, so y'all delivered Crystal River every day. You delivered Homosassa and Homosassa Springs every other day.
Yep.
And then on the off days you weren't in Homosassa and Homosassa Springs, you went to Inglis and Yankeetown.
Yep, right.
And y'all processed whole milk, skim milk,
buttermilk,
cream.
Yep.
When did you get into the ice cream?
The ice cream went out during the Depression, and I don't know anything about it except that I found some containers up in the top of the milk house that had Dumas ice cream on it.
So So they did deliver ice cream, but that would have been prior to what you remember.
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
And what I'll do, I'll go ahead and repeat because I don't think he's projecting enough. So, your dad sold the dairy in 45, 46, and went in. What you got in 45 and went into the service.
Yeah, or before that.
Okay. 44.
Yeah, maybe 44 or 43.
And was in the service for a few years.
Yep.
War ended. He came back.
Yep.
Got into the dairy business again.
After about a year
Yeah.
or so.
But at that point, you were not living on the dairy, but you were living on 9th Street.
Right. But then we had a paper route, and we had to get up at 4:30 every morning to deliver papers so we could get back and be at school on time.
So this would have been the time you were 15, 16?
Yeah, but before that, I delivered on a bicycle for a while.
Okay. So you had a paper route. This would have been in the early 40s or mid 40s or so?
Yeah, right.
Okay. So you had a paper route. You did it on a bicycle, but then later you started doing it in the car, and y'all delivered papers where?
We delivered papers in Chris River, Homosassa Springs, and Old Homosassa.
And he can still tell me who lived where, going down the street, and some of their habits, but which we won't get into.
And I delivered on a bicycle Daddy put a motor on when I was 11, and I did that till I was 13, and then we got a constable in town, so he sold a motorbike, and I said, well, I could ride it at 14, but he didn't listen to me. He sold it.
Was it the Chronicle?
Was it the Chronicle?
No, the Chronicle only came out once a week.
So what paper was it?
Tampa Tribune.
Tampa Tribune. And the Chronicle was a weekly paper, only came out once a week. Actually, it was not the Chronicle, it would have been the Sentinel. The Chronicle was from the other side of the county.
But it only come out once a week.
But it only came out once a week.
Yeah.
I believe it came out on Tuesdays, and the Sentinel came out on Thursdays.
Yeah.
And the Sentinel was much more interesting than the Chronicle. But don't tell Jerry I said that. So. You graduate from high school in 1953.
Right.
From there, where were you headed to when you graduated from high school?
Well, right out of high school, I worked in Highlands, North Carolina at a hotel that was only open 4 months out of the year, and it was a golf course. And so I did that the first year, and then my brother got the job that I had, and he must have worked up there 6 or 7 years and married a gal from up in the mountains. So,
Can y'all hear this? Or do I need to repeat it? Okay.
Come in with the microphone in 10 minutes.
Okay. But when you graduated from high school, what was your, were you planning on going, you went to work for the summer, but where were you planning on going from?
I was planning on going to Tampa to a business college.
A business college. Okay.
But-
So you graduated from high school, you're planning on going to a
Yeah.
business college in Tampa. You went to Highlands, North Carolina, and worked the summer at a country club as a
Night clerk.
night clerk.
Yeah.
Okay. Came back in at the end of the summer. Something happened about that time. You got hired by somebody. Tell us a little bit about that. Who hired you and why?
They was going to open a bank here, and the easiest thing is that Doc Hudson was principal of the high school, and had recommended me. And I was at the station changing a big truck tire, and back then, if a truck had a flat, they would usually take the flat off, and another truck would stop, pick it up with them, and they would bring it in, and this one was hauling fruit, so he was needing to get on up. So they come by and said, "Would you like to work in the bank?" And I said, "Well, I'd like to talk to you about it." Well, I said, "But this truck driver's got to get this fruit." I said, "It'll be about 10 minutes and I'll be through." But it was Doc Hudson, the principal of the high school, that recommended me.
And for those that didn't hear it in the back, Dad worked for his dad at a station, the Texaco station that was been across the street from the city hall.
And it was open 24 hours a day.
Open 24 hours a day. Truck had a flat tire, and he was changing the flat tire when was Mr. Brandon came up.
No, it was Harvey Edwards.
Okay, then Mr. Edwards, who was one of the directors of the bank, came up and offered Dad a job in the bank. Of course, Dad was changing the tire, and Dad figured it was a whole lot better to work in the bank than it was to change tires. So I don't know if he took it sight unseen or not, but from there you went to work for the bank in
January of '54.
Went to work for the bank. You actually started at the bank the day it opened, January the 15th, 1954.
Yeah, but they said since I had the job, I need to go to Dunellen Bank to learn something about how to do it. So I probably worked up there a month or two.
So you went to Dunellen and had to train to be a banker before you could come to work in Crystal River, which you started on the day it opened in 1954. That building would have been the building over where?
Just across the street. Yeah.
One with the octopus on it. So the bank, the building on the corner. There was a picture on here somewhere. You told me that that particular picture was not taken when the bank was opened because you realized there was some.
Yeah, there was a bank there before the Depression. It was called the Bank of Crystal River. Later we changed it to Crystal River Bank. But it went down during the Depression, and I don't remember when it was.
But on that, and basically the original building that was built for the Bank of Crystal River. Bank of Crystal River broke during the Depression. The building sat vacant from 1928, 29 until 54 when the Crystal River Bank, different name, opened. But you said that particular picture, you noticed that it was not the original opening date because there was some vent work.
The bank took up half of the building, and Edwards grocery store took up half of the building. So you go in the bank, you went in the catty corner thing, and then Edwards grocery store was on the same building down to the right. And
what I'm trying to get him to say was his comment when he looked at the picture was no, that picture was not taken the day the bank opened because that picture shows the air conditioning, and they didn't have air conditioning when they first opened. So they didn't get air conditioning for probably 2 or 3 years later.
I think the second year.
Yeah, second year. And how many buildings in Crystal River had air conditioning at that point?
I don't know.
Very few.
Very few. But it had high windows, and you could open them. Had high ceilings, kind of like this one here.
So you went to work at 18 years old at the bank, and you retired there after how many years?
54.
54. And you started out as the teller or bookkeeper.
Yep.
Whatever needed to be done.
Right. Yep.
Empty the trash.
Yeah,
What did you retire as?
I retired as president.
You retired as president. Okay.
When the bank opened, there was three people. There was a man that had been a bank examiner, and he decided he wanted to go in the meat processing business in Ocala. And he tried that, and it wasn't his cup of tea. So when he found out the bank was opening, he knew how to bank. And we had another young lady that was the bookkeeper.
We're going to see if we can get some amplification here. So, yeah. And we apologize. This is something we hadn't taken into consideration. The bank. You started out at 18. That time period. Where was the best hamburger in town?
We did not have any fast food stations, but there was a restaurant across the street from the bank. And I don't know what the restaurant was called, but
They can hear you, yeah. So.
it was Atlas Huff's wife. He had a gas station just across the street when it was 2 lane, and his wife had the restaurant, and they opened up for the lunch and then stayed open till about 8 o'clock.
I need to talk into it a little bit more. Yeah. So this was Miss Effie Huff's restaurant?
Yes, right,
Okay. Across the street from the bank on 19.
right.
And so where was the best pizza in town?
We did not have a pizza place in town. My first pizza was after Roger Carroll and I was married. The chef from Port Paradise took us to Ocala, and we had pizza for the first time I had pizza.
Yeah. Just a back note here, just because it needs to be kind of explained. He referred to Mom. Mom's name is Roger. Her given name was Roger, and so that's what, I mean, it was not a big deal. That's what everybody called her. So when he refers to Roger, that's who that is. If he refers to Granny, that would be my mother's mother, Lola Daniel. And if he refers to Grandma, that would be my grandmother on his side, which is Louise Dumas. So we apologize because we get stuck in these stories, and we tend to use names that may be a little out of touch with what you're talking about. So when you were a kid, or excuse me, not a kid, but growing up, teenager, how often did you go out to eat much?
No, almost never.
Almost never. What were some of the premier restaurants in Crystal River when you were a young adult?
We had Effie Huff, and then south of town, we had Walter Brooks had a truck stop, and he had a restaurant in his truck stop.
Tavern open?
Who?
Tavern open?
Oh yeah, the Green Tavern was a good place to eat. They had good food.
Of course, at that point, Plantation's not been built yet.
No,
Port Paradise
was
just being built at that point.
Yep.
Now, you actually worked at Port Paradise for a short period of time.
yes. Mr. Mutt Williams was a manager, and he lost his night help, and so I agreed that I would help him out till he got a new man. So I probably worked out there 3 or 4 months, but I had to go to work at 10 o'clock, and after the bar closed, it was dead, so I could sleep on the couch, and I still worked at the bank, and I probably made more money Port Paradise than I did at the Bay.
And you referred to Mutt Williams. Mutt Williams was A.D. Williams Jr.
Right.
As we move forward, I would like to go ahead and open this up, and if we can control it, if you have some questions, I would love to have you ask them. So go ahead.
Well, just on that last topic about Buck Williams, you said that was A.D. Williams Jr.
Yeah, Mutt Williams, M-U-T-T.
Muttwood, okay. And was he the original builder of the port? Is that what
No.
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 Oh, okay.
No.
I missed
His wife was
Dazzy Vance.
Dazzy Vance's daughter, and a long time she worked at the high school as the secretary for the principal. But
Dazzy Vance was a professional baseball player. He was a Babe Ruth contemporary. So, D.
We didn't hear a lot back here about when you had your dairy business.
Mm-hmm.
Could you kind of go through that a little bit again?
Okay. Realize that the dairy portion, would have been from the time he was 10 years old and younger. So, he doesn't have a lot of memories of it other than what he's been told. But would you kind of go over a little bit about what the dairy, when Grandpa was in the dairy business, what he did, where he delivered, and that type of thing?
yeah, when Dad first got in the dairy business, he had a dairy at Lecanto, and it's on the property near where Horace
Allen?
Allen lives, and there's a cave there, and he was afraid the cows were going to fall in the cave, so he fenced around it. But and I never went down there. Well, I might not have been bored, but after he had the dairy in Christian River, I went down in that cave with Horace Allen's permission several times. And I haven't been down there in the last 50 years either.
So when was he in the dairy business in Christian River? About?
I don't know, it was sometime before the Depression started, because they was building the new 19, and up around the red level there was lots of extra rock, and he could get the rock free for picking it up, so they didn't have to haul it off. And he built the 20-cow milking barn and the operation of where you bottle the milk and wash the bottles and kept the milk cold in the cold room. And then it had a steam room where you steamed all the milk was delivered in bottles, and you had to wash the bottles, and then you had to put them in the steam room and turn the steam on it and let it set for several hours. Did it at night, and when it was ready next morning. So there was plenty of rock. So,
Right. Yeah. Now the dairy was located up near the high school. It was Dumas Dairy. It later became Smith Dairy for a couple of years. It became Dumas Dairy again, became Smith Dairy again. Then Miss Smith sold it to Mr. Betts, and it became Betts Farm. Betts ended up selling it to Tamposi. Tamposi now sold it back to the county, and the county owns it, and they're trying to sell it. It is the property from the high school north across where Turkey Oak goes through. If you go into the entrance to the high school, the new entrance to the high school, when you see the tennis ball courts on the left, as you get up to the building, that's where the house was, and then a little bit north of that is where the barn was. And all I can say is this: thank goodness they got rid of that thing before I came along.
When he was talking about the cave out there at Horace House, is that on the same property where Maynard's live now?
Yes.
That's what I thought.
Okay, any other questions? Phyllis?
So when did Michigan got started, and when did we start seeing people from the north coming down to fish? When did that start?
No, they still coming down. She's asking about Michigan Town.
Oh, Michigan Town,
Yeah.
yep.
When did that start, and what do you remember? What have you been told about Michigan Town?
Everybody in Michigan Town, most of the time, was from Michigan.
Yeah, and that's one of the things going back in time, most people that lived in Crystal River did not necessarily want to live on the river. If you were someone who had the ability to build a nice home, you tended to build it away from the river. Things were different back then. Those people who lived on the water lived there because they had to work on the river. Or you were from Michigan and you came here and you were just going to go fishing on the weekends, I guess. We didn't see the growth of waterfront properties until really into the 50s.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell us anything about Christmas Island and Lawrence Island?
She's wanting to know, can you tell anything about Christmas Island or Lolly's Island?
I think
No.
you could tell more about it.
Now, you knew Mr. Flanagan,
Yes, very well, yep.
and he was how old in relationship to you? How old was his kids in relationship to you?
The older kids were about my age.
Okay.
'Cause-
So Flanagan's older kids were about your age,
Yeah.
and he had how many? I know it was a passel. I've heard
15, 16.
15,
Yep.
16. I've
Yep.
heard 20. I don't know for sure. But growing up, he was known for something, being able to do something that no one else in town could do with boats.
Yeah, he could build boats, but then when I was a teenager, he could put in a regular boat, he could put a screw in it for an inboard motor, and did several.
So he had the ability to as a shipwright to actually put in an inboard motor and put a drive shaft through the hull, and make it work. So Christmas Island, what do you remember about Christmas Island?
Not much.
Not much?
No.
I do know that one of their, I don't know if it was the original boat owner, but one owner had an amphibious car that would come down, go down beach, and it would actually have a driveway up on the east side of it, and could drive up in there. And I know, but I don't know. I don't remember exactly who built it, and how long it's been there. So, any,
What was the most challenging fire you had to deal with?
I'm sorry.
What was the most challenging fire you needed to deal with?
Challenging.
Most challenging fire? Well, I would tell you that there's two places that's burned multiple. Are you okay back there? She's good. I'm trying to embarrass her. Michelle, are you okay? Probably, when you talk about the most challenging, I would tell you there's two places that have burnt multiple times, that have been difficult fires multiple times. We've had multiple fires at port over the years. And it's been fairly small contents fires, room fires, and it's one of those that at any time you have a fire at a hotel. It just is a scary situation. Generally it is a well-built building. It's the actual original building is poured concrete. So the other is Jones's restaurant, now Sarah's, and we've had a number of fires there and nothing lately, but in the past we have, and with it being used as both a restaurant and a gas station, truck stop. That always was always a concern. The No Name Storm was probably the biggest, the one that kind of was mind numbing. Of course, Dad was in the hospital when that went through,
And he wouldn't answer the phone.
and I wouldn't answer the phone. I was all over town that day, and I don't know how he got through, but I bet you 50 people tell me your dad's trying to get a hold of you. And what was happening? The phone was, we were still on the old wire phones at that point. Phone calls could come in, but phone calls could not go out. So he was getting a hold of everybody. If he thought of somebody that might know where I might be, he was calling them. And they would, Jack, your dad's trying to get a hold of you. I said, well, I can find the phone that dials out, I'll call him, So it was kind of a crazy day and a half. So. Yes, ma'am.
So were there other weather phenomena besides the more recent ones you just mentioned?
Have there been other weather phenomenon such that we had floods or hurricanes or anything like that in the past?
No.
64?
Yeah.
You got the pic-
I've got a picture. I've got a picture of Jack when he was about this big at the old Crush River bank, and we was in water up to about our knees, and it was up to his top of his
Speak
legs.
into it.
And I should have brought that so y'all could have seen it, but
It's just, I'm trying to get that figured out. Sorry.
I would say we've been very fortunate as far as hurricanes here. There was, the No Name Storm was the worst we know of. There was one back in the 50s that was really bad, in 1950. There was the Helene was it not Helene? Hermine. Right, that was in 16. We've been very fortunate with storms. So.
What really put Crystal River on the map before the manatee craze?
I don't think we were. What put Chris River on the map? I would say, what was, when you were, in your 20s, what was Chris River known for? Fishing?
yeah, fishing.
Yeah, but,
Jack,
yeah.
at one time, the cedar mill was there for the Pepsi company.
Right.
That
Right. And what he's talking about is and this goes back to the late 1800s, early 1900s. There was a large cedar mill, and the cedar mill would be about where Best Western is, and then there was a mill where they actually did cedar slats, which would be a little bit further to the west. If you know where Northwest 9th and 8th avenues are when they come to the river, it's in that cove. And they made slats for pencils, and they were about yay big, the length of a pencil, and they were about yay wide. And from what my grandmother says is that from what I understand, they shipped those to somewhere up north, and they'd put the graphite in, and they actually had the grooves already in it, and they would put the graphite in, glue two pieces together. Talking to my grandmother, when they went to the store to get pencils, that's how they came. They came in those slats, and you'd have to take a pocket knife and split them, and then sharpen it with a pocket knife to use the pencil. And it ended up meaning that the pencil was square rather than round or octagon.
Where did most of the folks that settled Crystal River come in from? Like Georgia, South Carolina, or did they come right over from Great Britain, or were they Native American, or combination?
Somewhere far, far away. And I would say for this, you're asked, I mean, do you have any idea? My mother's family goes back a few generations. Prior to being here, they lived in northern Florida. Before that, they lived up in Savannah. They originally came over on the Mayflower. That doesn't mean that every family did that. Once Crystal River was kind of designated as a fishing, a place for rich people to go fishing, then we started having people come in from an article in today's paper about the Atlanta Club in Homosassa. Prominent Atlanta business people having a club in Homosassa. We had Babe Ruth came here. Dazzy Vance came here and lived his life here or retired here. I think they came from a little bit of everywhere. One of the things I find interesting is, I have when I meet somebody new, is where are you from? Because I know they're from somewhere else. So it's always fun to find out where they're from. So, but I think they just came from all over.
Jack, somebody asked about Lolly Island.
Yes.
And we used to be known for oysters out of this area too.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I understand, Flanagan, all the oyster shells out there was on the island out there.
Wouldn't doubt it. Yeah, and what Jim's talking about is that Crystal River was known for oystering for a long time. In fact, there were multiple oyster houses in town. There were two out on where Pete's Beer is now. There was also a oyster house even up until the maybe even early 60s. In front of Charlie's, for those that remember the Wheel Inn, it was right where the Wheel Inn is now. Or was where the Wheel Inn is. Basically, in Charlie's parking lot on the far left, right up against 19, there was a big tin building there that was an oyster house, and Dad talks about oyster shells. They would just give them to anybody. If you wanted oyster shells, you could do it. You could just go get oyster shells. And of course, a lot of people say, well, why would you want oyster shells? Well, what Dad and my grandfather would do is get them, and because they lived on the dairy and it was a dirt road to go to the dairy, you'd have in the sugar stand to be a two-rut road, if you will. Well, they would just get a truckload of oyster shells, drop the oyster shells in those ruts, and then over time they would crush and over time build up a good firm base. So if Dad refers to the oyster shell road, the oyster shell road would be Northeast 3rd Avenue from Crystal Street to the north. That would be, Dad, growing up, that's what Dad always referred to as the oyster shell road.
Because it was oyster shells.
Right.
Was there ever anything out on Shell Island?
Was there ever anything out on Shell Island? Nothing permanent. I mean, there was some camps out there that were out there for years, but nothing permanent. Don't ask me a question. You know the answer.
I'm not going to ask you about the cow eating the school teacher's flower.
talked about the train and the mullet train and Cutler Spur.
Let me see.
The mullet drain and Cutler Spur. And I'm not sure which story you're wanting me to tell. Huh?
People don't know, a lot of people don't know there was a train that ran through Christopher River.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. One of, what he's bringing up is the fact that we had a train. Everybody's familiar with the depot over on Crystal Street. Well, the train came from Dunellen, and tracks came across Crystal Street there, came across 19 just to the east of the Brandon Bank, ran down what we call the Crosstown Trail, and then it ended up going where currently Three Sisters Trail is from the post office out to 44 West. Fort Island Trail. Excuse me. Now I'm getting stuck like Dad in old times. Originally, this would be back in the 30s and 40s and early 50s. That railroad went all the way to Homosassa, and there was a turntable in Homosassa, and so they would get to Homosassa, turn around, come back. There was also a smaller gauge rail that went from there and went down past Chaswiska. It was used for timber, that has been long gone now. So yes, there was a rail here. Even up until the 80s, the rail went up to where the post office is now, and they actually loaded pulpwood there by hand, which if you've never seen men load a pulpwood truck by hand, you have not, that's sheer feats of strength. Just awesome. So.
Also, don't forget that it used to run out to the rock crusher.
Mm-hmm.
Then it come on down to where
To Fifth. Right. Now that was before your time.
crab plant,
Right.
and they loaded those on where
Yeah.
greenhouse is now.
Right. What he's talking about is that not only did it run to Homosassa, but there was a spur that came off. And I say a spur, an ability to change to another track, and there was a set of tracks that went from about where Home Depot is over to where the rock crusher is. During the war, the rock crusher, and that's what everybody referred to it as. It was a rock crusher. The rock crusher actually shipped 100 cars a day of rock out for use in making landing fields all over the country. But there was also a spur. There's actually two spurs. One came off at right about where the Home Depot is, where the current depot is on Crystal Street, and came about, it turned this way and came across about where the Baptist Church is now, behind City Hall, in front of the firehouse, and went down to the cedar mill. Then there was another one that came off right about where 3rd Street is in the crosstown, and it came back this way and came back and dead-ended at the crab plant, what is now the crab plant. There was actually back then, there was it just one fish house or two? There was two fish houses. Both of them in Yeoman?
No, Arthur Lewis had one, John Lee Lewis, and Arthur Lewis had one.
Okay.
And that railroad track just down the block from here.
Done, right. So there's a picture floating around about that, but it just dead ended there. They would ship mullet from there. They're right about where, right here at Crystal Street and 5th. They would load dolomite from Red Level dolomite. They'd bring it in by truck, put it on the trains, and ship dolomite all over the country. So the train business was a big thing. I can even remember as a kid going by and picking up freight at the depot, but that went away late 70s, early 80s. Yes.
What was mullet being used for?
Mullet. What was mullet being used for? For us, that's kind of a delicacy. You know. Mullet is it was shipped up north. It's a bit of a different fish if you've never had it. Right. No. But you can fry it. You can can it. In the day, mullet was. I mean, the train was actually known as the Mullet Express. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Was the railroad owned by a particular entity, or was it? Yeah, and I would say at different times we don't know. Towards the end of in the 40s and 50s, it was Atlantic coastline. Atlantic coastline.
Got behind the wire.
Jack, what brought the power plant here to begin with, and what influence did it originally have on what happened?
Okay. What brought the power plant here? And the first power plant was actually built by an individual, and it was a hydroelectric plant, which is where the dam is at Lake Russo. The phosphate, right. That would have been in the early 1900s-ish. I mean, very early on. Florida Power, their first plant that they built here was actually in Inglis. And please correct me, you know more about this than me. But it was built in Inglis and was a natural gas plant, if I remember right. And oil, you're right. Right. Yeah, they had Bunker C. They brought in Bunker C. The determination to build where they're at now, they built that starting in 65, 66, 64. And the first two units they built out there were two coal plants. They're referred to as units 1 and 2. Later in the 70s, they built the nuke plant. That came online, I believe, in 1977. In the 80s, they brought in 2 more coal plants. Part of the reason they built it where they were is because the access to the water, so that they could use it for cooling. Once they got those first 2 built, then the ecological issues started coming up. So when they built the nuke plant, it was already kind of slated for that. But when they built 4 and 5, they could not use the water coming in. They actually had to use a different method to cool, and that's where they built the 2 cooling towers. And those are those 2, not conical, what do you call them? Parabolic structures. Most people think that those 2 structures have to do with the nuke plant. They have nothing to do with the nuke plant. They cool units 4 and 5 only.
After 3 Mile Island, which they always show the cooling tower, anything happens to the nuclear plant out here, they zero in on these cooling towers.
Yeah. And they're like at 2 different ends of the football field,
Separate for 20 headquarters.
Yeah. So
Did that bring in a group of outside college people that came? I mean, what did the nuclear power plant require a lot of talent that couldn't be obtained here, or were they able to use everyone that was
right.
here?
Yeah, and I would say that overall I shouldn't say that. Florida Power brought in higher paying jobs than, I mean, it was the industry that had the higher paying jobs for a number of years. One of the things they were able to do for especially the coal units, they actually brought in people and promoted from the bottom up. And so a lot of the operators ended up being people from here. Once the nuke plant started going off or in operation, it brought in additional people. And of course, it brought in a bunch of people in just in construction. Working for Dad during that period, banking was a totally different animal then than it is now, and everybody got a paycheck. Everybody's on Social Security got a Social Security check. So everybody that had a check came in the bank. So the bank was a popular place on Thursdays and Fridays because that was payday and people came in. So it brought a lot of people from all over the country that found Christopher River, and it did bring in operators that had special licenses, and they were high-paying jobs, and the city and the community absorbed that, and it was very good for the community. I don't think we realized how important that was until Duke did their thing and shut it down, and then all of a sudden we lost that 500-600 paying jobs that were very high tier paying jobs, and of course, when did it happen? It happened right when the recession hit in 2008. That happened, and it was a kind of a bang 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 type thing, and it hurt. Yeah.
Jack, and I add a little something on that too. All of the original shift supervisors at the nuclear plant come from the other fossil plants all around the system. Mm-hmm. They had to go through all kinds of intensive training and everything to get there.
Right.
And then there's a lot of them come in Navy Nuke.
Navy Nuke, yeah. So, but ultimately, those jobs were not your starting wage type people. Yeah.
The starting wage is
Yeah.
building service.
Yeah. So
Low total folks.
yeah, they were well paid. So and ultimately they made Christopher River a better place. When they all left overnight, it hurt.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Phyllis.
Okay, when Brown was growing up, I know he didn't live on the water, he lived on the dairy, but did you ever hear about manatees? And if so, would you eat them now?
I don't know that the time limit is gone by yet. She's asking. You grew up here, but the river was here. You didn't go out on the river much, but what did you hear of manatees? And two, have you ever eaten one?
No, I have not eaten a manatee.
Statute of limitations says run.
Yeah, something like that.
I don't think so.
What was the other part of the?
Were manatees something you heard a lot about?
No, when I was a kid, I never saw a manatee till I was about 16, and saw one in the river. We had a canoe, but
You can't.
I said I was about 16 whenever I saw my first manatee. Before that, we had a canoe, and we run all over the rivers in the canoe, and I never saw one till I was about 16.
But you weren't out in a canoe when it was 30 degrees outside either.
Oh no, no.
And I will tell you. I mean, me growing up here, I know that when when someone whose dad was a fisherman saw a manatee, it was like wildfire through the school.
Yeah.
And of course, nobody called it Manatee. It was a sea cow. You know, Dad saw a sea cow, and it was like, wow, you know. I believe that, you know, from my reading, that if you go back, you know, into the early 1900s or even in the 1800s, that they were more prevalent than they were later in the 20th century. I think the numbers were here, they went down, and now they're back up. I'm telling you, that's just based on some reading I've done. But yeah, during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, they were there, but they were not there in the numbers that you see now. But I heard they taste like chicken. And I doubt that very seriously. I think they taste more like beef, but that's okay.
I have a story about that.
Go ahead.
My dad was a commercial fisherman here for years and years, but when he was a little boy, he lived across the street right here where the park is. And when he, in 1920, the reason all the buildings on this side of the street are brick, this side of the street burned in 1920. So when they rebuilt it, they built it out of brick. So that's why these buildings are brick. But Daddy grew up, he actually went away when he was 7 years old because he was orphaned. Came back when he was 15 and became a commercial fisherman eventually. And he told me, my daddy never lied to me, he said that manatee was better than any beef he ever ate. And back during the Depression in that era, they ate everything. He said the only thing he wouldn't eat was a cormorant.
What?
A cormorant.
Cormorant, we don't call them that. But he said they tried to cook one, the longer they cooked it, the more it stunk, so they flew it overboard. But Daddy, you know, other than the time he was away in the orphanage home and in the Army, he lived in Crystal River his whole life.
Yeah.
And he worked at the power plant. He started at the power plant in 1951, worked at the hydro plant, the Eagles plant. He was on the startup crew at Unit 1, Crystal River Unit 1, which went online in 1964. And then he retired in 76 as they were building the nuclear plant.
Right.
And Tom worked with my daddy at the plant. But, you know, that's one of those stories that I wish I'd have written down or recorded because Daddy had many of these stories. But he told me it says manatee was better than any beef he ever ate.
Yeah. Luther and I are cousins. His grandmother and my great-grandmother were sisters.
Yeah, your great-grandmother.
And your grandfather and my great-grandfather were brothers. So two sisters married to the... But I will say that Uncle Buck had to be dang hungry to even think about cooking a cormorant. So, so anyway, yes, ma'am.
First of all, I understand that manatee tastes halfway between a bald eagle and a whoopie bird. That's a whole other story. I wanted to ask you, can you give us some history of Hunter Springs? I've heard that Hunter Springs was donated to the city with some restrictions. And what do you know about that and what restrictions were there?
Oh, me.
We're doing research.
Our attorney's reviewing this, and we'll get back with you.
When I was a small kid, my daddy would say, let's go down to the beach and work for 30 minutes and then swim for 15. And that's what we'd do. We'd go down there and cut weeds or stuff like that. And to get to the springs, there was just one little road, dirt road down there. And there was a wooden dock that somebody had built, but then there was weeds grew up all around. There was no other buildings there. And we'd go down there with swing things, and we'd work for 20, 30 minutes, and then we'd get to swim for 15. So,
Why did your dad ask you to do that? I mean, who was he to ask you to do that?
I don't know.
I mean, I know he's your dad. That's not what I'm asking. Yeah.
My dad was mayor for a long time.
Right.
But then he was active in the American Legion, and they had a building down. They was going to build a building. In fact, I helped them build it. I was down there one day, and they said, "We're plastering the inside walls." And so I said, "Well, I'll help you with bringing the cement in." And they said, "We're going to teach you how to plaster." So one day I plastered the wall inside.
Yes.
Tell me what you know about the old ice house on 44 and 19 and there's no other ice house fishing built after that.
He's asking about the old ice house at 44 and 19. But there were other ice houses before that. So I'll let you talk about it.
About the one that,
What do you know about the one at 44 and 19? Who ran it?
Mr. Holder. Lonzo Holder. But before that, there was one on Third and
The railroad track?
the railroad track. But it caught fire one time, and about the time I joined the fire department. So I went to that fire. And then before that, there was one down here on the river at Eubanks Fish House. And
That would be where Bayshore Drive is.
yeah.
Um,
But we had to go to the ice house on Third when it got warm, because the milk was cold and we didn't have refrigerated trucks, and we'd have to go get ice and chip ice on top of the top crate. We'd have about 4 crates in the truck. We'd chip it on the top one, and that would melt down by the time we got it delivered.
Brown, when that ice house started that you talked about on Third,
Yep,
we could see it from Ozella.
you could see it, they could see from Ozella when the ice house burned. Yep.
And Grandma lived across the road, she never left, she stayed right there.
Did y'all hear what Joe said, Brown?
that's not true.
I know it's not Joe. That's John.
Keep talking. You need to talk into the thing. They can hear me. They can hear you.
But I'm through.
Oh, you're through? Well, then
Yeah.
talk some more. What was your, the other, William, let's switch over to a different name, Williams. How many different Williams families were there in town that you and I have talked about lately that is kind of an interesting thing? And from what you've told me, you believe that they're not kin.
Right. Those that we talked about.
Talk into that.
But
They
not-
hear me, you can't.
But I can't remember the name, so you do it.
One of the things that I have loved doing over the last 20 years is
Willis House? Yes.
is learning about Christopher River from Dad. Mom died 5 years ago, and we generally had lunch. The three of us had lunch at least once a week, and sometimes twice a week. One of my favorite things to do was to ask questions I knew that one of them didn't know exactly right, and they would kind of, one would say, "This is what the answer was," and the other would say, "No, that's not right," and they would go back and forth for hours. They would generally call me. They drop me back off, and I go back to work. And then about 3 hours later, they'd call me and say, "Hey, we figured it out." So One of the interesting things in looking at a lot of old documents in town is that there were there was a lot of development in the 40s and 50s and early 60s by a group of people, and their names keep coming up over and over and over and over again. One is John Williams. John Williams, and I think it was senior, or is it not? Senior, okay. John was married to Betty. John lived in the vacant lot that's directly behind us here, but just to the right of Kings Bay Lodge. There was A.D. Williams. I mentioned A.D. Williams Jr. earlier, but A.D. Williams Sr. lived in the house at Crystal and Citrus on the northwest corner. And A.D. Williams, both of those individuals own multiple parcels all over this part of the county. Another name is Hoy Williams. Hoy lived at the end of Citrus on the right. You gotta keep me straight here, so, am I right?
You're right.
Okay. Again, on multiple properties throughout this area. That's 1, 2, 3. Mr. Williams, Norman Williams, which had the drugstore across the street, or no, next door.
No, it's across the road now.
Okay, it was across the street over the vacant, over where the park is now. He lived in the building where Crackers is now.
Right.
He drove over the grade, he went to the Cracker House bar there.
Yeah, and then there was one more Williams.
And Williams out there at level.
Yeah,
Williams.
Cotton Williams.
Cotton Williams.
Yeah. And then there was one from Homosassa.
And then right now, well, Herb was the mayor and it's the deputy. So there was and our dad and I have kind of, batted that around. And when you see documents, you'll see Don and Hoy on the same document. They would sell to each other. They would buy together and then sell. So it's just really kind of interesting. But to our knowledge, none of those Williamses were kin. So, no, you don't buy that?
And then there was Williams in Homosassa.
There were Williams on Sass, right, correct. Correct. And then, right, anyway, it's just an interesting tidbit. Yes?
You talk about your parents going back and forth. I had the pleasure of spending an afternoon with Brown and Roger Carroll, walking up and down 6th Avenue in 95-degree weather, looking at all the old buildings because we were getting plaques made on which building. And it was very interesting between the two of them to decide who was in each building. And we had a voice, but between the two of them, we got it all figured out.
Just so there's no misunderstanding. I remember once that Dad was right.
And the rest of the time he was happy.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Kim asked about the Willis house. That was my grandfather Willis's brother's boarding house. And that's where the Willis family lived. It said 1909. That's where they lived. And that's where Daddy stood on the front porch and watched this side of the town.
Come burn right. You got a question?
Yeah, that's in color generation. The original hydro plant opened in there now. And it's not just river close by. The first house in the county that was lit was Mr. Riley. He installed the generators at the plant. He had to run a wire to his house that leads out to the snow. And one of the first substations is still standing. It's on 41 before you get to Hernando. It's a 2-story building with a tile roof, and it still has some of the insulators and stuff on the first substation, possibly he was like, probably maybe 30s. You can still see it.
Interesting. Tom?
Hey Jack, did Red Skelton ever have a place here?
The question is, did Red Skelton ever have a place here?
Did who?
Red Skelton ever have a place here?
His manager has a place in Ocala, in the horse country.
Right.
I see mine.
Never.
No, we had heard that going down Fort Paradise between Fourth and Fifth, on the left side of the road, he'd owned that. Okay.
Don't know. Don't know.
I have one more question. When did the train stop running on the Cutlass Spur and all the other spurs into town? Was it when the pencil factories?
What was that again?
When the trains all stopped running on the spurs and Cutlass Spur and?
Well, it ran up to behind, or up to that vacant lot near the post office until the early 80s. But from there south, do you know when they quit running the train south of there? Now, they were running it to the Rock Crusher during the war.
Yeah, right, but since then, I don't think they've done it.
It would have been probably late 40s, early 50s.
Jack, what I can remember is when we were coming out of Venezuela, there used to be a track across there by
Tributaries.
But they had the cattle gap there, but the track was up. Then we get on 19 up there at Home Depot. The track was down, and they had the school bus had to stop. People on trains couldn't come through there because they had cabin trees growing in between the. But the school bus had said stop, and they stopped. I always thought it was kind of crazy, but you never know when they.
And that would have been in.
Oh, that was in the 50s.
Okay. So yeah, probably late 40s, early 50s when they stopped.
I remember it spurring, when I used to go to the Church of God, where then it's on Fifth is now. I remember being in church on Sunday nights and the train going behind the church, going down to the fish house. That was in the mid-60s.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
With all these different families and things, were there any, not feuds, but controversies that kind of rival themselves?
Oh, no. We never got. It was never like the Hatfields and McCoys. We're all kin, so it's kind of like the Hatfields and the Hatfields. I don't know of any family feuds that went on that resulted in anything other than, I was going to say bloodshed, but I'm sure there was bloodshed. I don't know of any burials that took place. How's that?
Jack, I do not to get any business around here when I was a kid, because your granddaddy was paddling my hanging, and by the time I got that grandma's or something, Daddy found out about it, I didn't get it again.
Well,
And I'm sure you've been down that road before too with my dad.
well, that's the way things were then, and yes, and his daddy was my bus driver, so I was a cherub. Let's say that I had to be talked to more than once by your dad. Yeah. So, and that's the way things were. You know, I mean, even at the point when I started driving, you know, I remember Nehemiah. I came into town driving too fast, and Nehemiah was over on the side, and he just sees me and points his finger at me, and I know, okay, it's time for me to go fess up to Dad because I'm about to have the hammer come down. So.
There's some water there on
Yeah, that's
About what year was that picture, Jack?
looking at the vehicles. It looks like it's probably in the early 50s, and that would be the pure station that was.
And then behind it, that building there, that one time, Auto Pick had a
Shoe shop in it, yeah.
And then later on,
Ralph Brooks had a haircut. That's where I got my first haircut.
And then, well, I got mine over here.
That's not funny.
But then right next to that, liquor shop in there, where the old gas station.
And if you never got to go see Mr. Pick and get your shoes fixed, you missed an experience. So it was that. So I don't know what happened to him, but he didn't have legs. And
Back in the day.
yeah. So, yes, sir.
Jack, Brownie, Jim Kimbrough, I just want to say it was great to have him as a competitor. I recently retired as 50 years with SunTrust. Not a finer banker in this part of the woods than Brownie Dumas.
What was that?
It was Mr. Kimbrough saying that you're the finest banker in the area.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, Jack, I want to say something about your daddy too. I joined the Christopher Fire Department when I was 16 years old, and I learned a lot from him, and Jake Carter, and Russell Dick. And the good firefighters.
How do you talk about the first fire truck?
What's the first fire truck? What's the first fire truck you remember?
It did not have, the only way to fight a fire was to connect to a fire hydrant and put hose out. We did not have a pump on the truck.
So what was it? Was it a hearse?
Oh yeah, it was a hearse. And it was on the old city hall down here, and on the louvered doors beyond, on the same building as the city hall, that's where we kept the truck. And when it blew the siren, then we come down here to see where the fire was. But
When did y'all get that one? Turn around.
Pompeo gave us that one, and I don't remember what year it was, Brad. Come out of New York.
I do not know.
It was about the time he was doing that Seven Rivers Golf course and that housing development out there, but I don't remember what it was.
But that one, I think, got a pump on it because it's got a suction.
Old American La France.
Yeah.
That was a good truck.
That was before me.
And when she introduced us, she was saying that we was fire chiefs for 70 years and 45 years. We've been on the fire department that long. We haven't been the fire chiefs that long.
There's been 40 years between the two of us.
Yeah, 40 years between the two of us.
Any other questions? We got to eat up another 34 minutes. Make it a slow question.
Back in the day when we had old army trucks and 6.5s as tankers. You remember when we took Homosassa Springs, or Homosassa when the school burned? I think we carried that one and the big tanker down there. That's been a day or two ago.
I remember that fire.
Yeah.
I remember I went with you and.
Yeah.
But when you first got on the fire department, what was the coverage for Christopher Fire Department at that point?
West side Citrus County.
Yeah, West Citrus, including Lee Canto, Chester Whiskey, and Inglis.
So how many houses did you save?
Jack, how many lots did you say?
Yeah. So, okay. So yes, ma'am.
Can you tell us more about the Dumas Farm?
The Dumas Farm. What is there anything else you can say about it? There's.
My dad had about 950 or 60 acres out there, and it was fenced, and we mainly put cows on it and milked cows. We had the fence section so we'd have cows in one section for a while, and then we'd put them in another section for eating the grass.
How many cows did you milk?
When we sold it the second time, we was milking between 75 and 80. So,
Did you have to have people helping you? You hire people?
yeah, well, there was my dad and my mama and my brother and I, and sometimes we had some help, but most of the time the help worked in the processing, bottling and washing the bottles and bottling the milk. So,
But y'all would, when Miss Smith bought it, y'all helped out a little bit, and she had some people that who were they?
no, well,
All of her family.
you know, all of her family, and Junior Hart, and some guy that lived up the road towards Jack's house. Can't think of his name.
So to pass, I mean, when y'all were working, y'all would they would talk in a different language. What language was that?
Oh, you know, sometimes they talk Pig Latin, but everybody knew Pig Latin. But then they talked the ARP language. And then we had, one time Daddy hired a guy that worked in a carnival, and they spoke the Is language. But the ARP language, if you said, let's go swimming, when the ARP language, you'd say, Larpit, Scarpo, Swarpin, Arpin. And when we was real young, Mom and Daddy would say that, but then pretty soon we could understand it. And then my kids understood
We
it.
figured it out too, yeah. And they would in Pig Latin they would sing. What would they sing?
Oh my gosh, some song. I forgot what it was.
I love you for sentimental reasons.
Yes, but I can't sing.
I have got him to sing it for me, but it ain't gonna happen tonight. Well, I didn't start early enough, so, but it is hilarious, so, yes.
Yeah, a segue away. What was it like when you got TV on the farm?
What was that? What was
I
that?
don't think they did. What was it like when you got TV on the farm?
We did not have TV whenever I got married. My wife and I got TV before my mom and daddy got TV. We got married in '56.
Go ahead.
Yeah, a place that you hired me to mow many times. I think these folks would have an interest in the Red Level Cemetery.
Yeah.
There's a lot of unmarked graves, and there's a lot there that we speak about.
He's asking about the Red Level Cemetery. I'm actually one of the trustees, and thank you for all your hard work when you were working with us to mow it. Red Level Cemetery is north of here, about 4 miles. It's just to the south of Florida Power Road, off of Old Tallahassee. It's about 3 acres. There are about 400 graves now, and it is it's not a community, but it is a multi-family in that there are probably about 6 or 7, 8 families that are intermarried, but are separate families that have people that are buried there. And they include the priest, the Levinses, the Williamses, and I'm pulling somebody out, in that,
Bird times?
well, the Bertimes.
At bird times.
Yeah. Bertimes are there.
My son married a bird time.
And so it's kind of an interesting. First grave was my great grandmother in 1863, and that she was an Edwards, our grandparents that we were talking about earlier that make me kin to Luther are there. So please don't discuss that. Don't discuss that outside this room, please.
Got 3 people
Family trees
waiting.
in Red Level were,
Several years ago, I ran into Mr. Priest when we were over at some thing that was going on over in the county. And I asked him if he would please adopt me so I could get a plot in there. He said he couldn't. It's beautiful.
See the one beyond them?
Yes, go ahead.
What's the history of the 3rd Street Cemetery?
That is it has been a city cemetery for as long as I've known. I don't know the oldest. Me as our city clerk, who's in charge of it, we've discussed some putting together a spreadsheet to be able to to look at some data on it. It's not available right now. I don't know what the oldest grave in there is, but I would imagine it probably goes back to that same era, 1850s, 1840s. And yes, I have kinfolks there also. Yes. Yep.
Okay. I understand, and maybe I have this wrong, that there was industry in Red Level before we ever had any in Crystal River, and why do you think that we developed and they didn't, just because of the water?
The only industry I know of in Red Level would have been the turpentine mill. Well, it wasn't phosphate, but they had dolomite there. Yeah. Why did Crystal River? I mean, I think that Crystal River was able to capitalize on on commerce rather than on industry. The problem with industry is that it's great as long as it works. But if it fails, whereas commerce, and if you can, if you're creating a retail hub, that is something that can be built on. And I think that's one of the things that we're trying to do today is how do we build on the retail hub that we have here to make it work long term.
We can't do it in Manatee.
Depends on how good it tastes. I'm sorry.
Railroad had a lot to do with that, Red Level.
Red Level, yeah.
Here too, I'm sure.
Sure.
Did we have any phosphate here? I never heard about Crystal River.
Yeah, and I think the most of the phosphate that was found was over like in Dunellen area. Yeah.
Around Holder.
Right. And then what you have north of here is not real good quality phosphate, but it's dolomite, which does something different to the soil. That it's.
They use it to sweeten up the orange trees and everything for the cold. Only one I've ever had it.
Yes, ma'am.
As a lifelong resident of Crystal River, what are you most proud of?
Wow. That was for you.
I didn't hear it.
It was for him, Jeff.
Thank you. As a lifelong resident of Crystal River, what are you most proud of?
That's for you.
You were quicker than me, so.
Okay, we can't
can't go any further from that, like that.
No.
You can say.
I'm speechless. I'm done.
Any more questions?
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Dixie.
I just want to tell a Brown Dumas story.
I thought what happens in the woods stays in the woods.
A long time ago, to run my father's ranch, Hollandwood Ranch, and I went into the Crystal River Bank and I said, Brown, I want to borrow some money to build a house. And he said, are you a majority stockholder of the Hollandwood Ranch? I said, no, sir, I'm not. He goes, well, I'm not going to loan any money to it. And he did loan me some money to build a double wide trailer. I'll never forget. Great friend.
Yeah. And of course, I think everybody knows Dixie, but Dixie's, the property that he's talking about, Hollingswood Ranch, was originally kind of put together by his grandfather, Dixie Hollins, and my great-grandfather, and a number of my uncles worked for Dixie's granddad. So Dixie's been very much part of our family for a long time. So.
I think they also had the property where Florida Power built that.
Yeah. They had the property where Florida Power is at that point. So. And the Barge Canal. So.
Well, Dixie, at one time, didn't you all own from Crystal River to the Withlacoochee?
Yeah, so. Mr. Vane? Yes, ma'am. Well, before I do it, let me. This.
My husband and I came here in 1967, and we started a business called Harbor Electric. In 2 years' time, Don and I bought the business, and it became Devane Electric, which is still operating today, but of course we don't own it. We sold it to my daughter and her husband, and they later sold it to someone else to pick up the name. And when we first came here, we rented a house on the Holiday Inn on the canal, which we had never lived near water. And so Don wanted a drum boat, and we were struggling with a new business. So we went into Brown and asked him if he could borrow $500 to buy a boat. And Brown told him, said, we never loaned money to buy a drum boat. But he said, I think we will, and he did. And really, that, other than buying a house or a car, that's the only time we ever borrowed money.
Go ahead. Yep.
Okay, anybody else? Any other questions? Okay, I just want to thank Jack and Brown. Thank you again so much for doing this. It is. You know, the purpose of these talks is to do, I think one of you gentlemen said, you're sad you didn't get your dad or your parents to tell these stories in front of people on film, and that's kind of what we're trying to do here, just capture some of the history of Crystal River that folks that have been here so long have, and it's invaluable to the city. So thank you again.
Well, thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Our next event will be Dr. Buddy Powell is coming. He is world-renowned manatee expert, and he accompanied Jacques Cousteau in the Three Sisters Springs when he was a high school student back in
Y'all wondering how they taste? He's an expert.
He might know. No. But May 21st, right back here, and then we have another event in June too. So please come back and join us again. Thank you.